First of all, it's like a bit of a journey for me to understand a relationship I was having with my dad. And he used to have his shed at the back of the house, and he used to keep all his tools in there, he used to keep everything in there. And I was never allowed to go in. I actually didn't have access to his tools or anything like that till he died. And now I've got them all, which is an odd thing in its own right, really. He sort of stopped me from really sort of pushing myself as a male, really. And he just didn't want me to be involved with those things, which is odd because there's the contrast to that later on when I left school. He just thought me being a photographer was not the sort of the male thing to do, really. They're sort of sanctuaries, really. That's the way I used to see them, as sort of like these areas that were they sort of exude sort of masculinity. These are hidden spaces, really, and where they can become something that they want to be, and that's what's interesting to me. So I wanted to keep it sort of hidden in that way, and I still wanted to feel like I was still the outsider from that, really. And that's why I just photographed the spaces from. You never saw the inside, you only saw the outside of the spaces, because I still felt and still sort of feel excluded from that, really. One of my other passions is motorbikes, and riding motorbikes and involved with a culture, a very male culture. It sort of felt a natural thing to think to myself, well, actually there's a group of people that I'm already involved with, would be interesting to document them, really. When I was discussing these sort of masculinity and sitting with these groups of men, and actually the very open conversations that we would have. We'd have similar histories about our relationships with our fathers, or relationships with our siblings, or so on, and whatever it might be. That was quite a big eye-opener for me, because I'd been sort of like thought that, you know, historically the biker culture was sort of very masculine sort of culture. You just sort of realised that actually they're just as vulnerable as I was. Once you started to talk to them, they started to seem to open out these sort of things, and that's what got me interested in them. I didn't want to photograph them in the garages. I didn't want to photograph them in a landscape. I wanted to photograph them in a space that I could create, that they could feel comfortable, and it was me and them, and that was it. There was nobody else in the room, and then they could open up in some ways. They were just really sort of quite responsive to what I was doing, really. And I think because once I'd photographed a couple, and once I got used to knowing how I was trying to get this, they sort of got the idea and thought, yeah, this is what we want to show. We don't want to show ourselves as these heroes in some ways. They sort of just show ourselves as the everyday guy who just rides motorbikes, really. When my dad died, the funeral director came along with the ashes. He were inside this red velvet bag, and the way he was holding them, it was quite sort of like as if he was holding like a child. And I actually did photograph that, and I thought that was quite interesting, that suddenly this is probably my dad at his most vulnerable. Even though he's dead, even though it's just ashes, it did feel sort of like at his most vulnerable stage. And in some ways, that velvet bag sort of like symbolised to me the sort of softness of everything, really. So that's why I thought that was the perfect sort of background to the portraits themselves, really. Settles a score to a certain extent. Felt I could get slightly closer to my dad and sort of understanding why these guys are so obsessed with bikes. And that was the element I never understood about my dad, is that I just couldn't understand what was their passion for it. And also just really about an insight into about my relationship with him, you know. So because he was such a dominant, you know, person within my life, it made me realise that all males are not like that.